Wait, what if everything you knew about your perfect life was actually a carefully constructed lie? What if the man you trusted, the man you sacrificed everything for, was hiding something so dark that it would destroy you forever? Today, we're telling you the story that will shatter your beliefs about love, betrayal, and the price of secrets. This is The Housemaid. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button right now because you need to see how this story ends. Trust me, you won't see it coming. Drop a like if you think betrayal is the ultimate crime. Let's begin. My name is Sarah, and 3 months ago, I thought I had everything. I was working as a housemaid for the wealthiest man in the city, Alexander Sterling, a billionaire real estate mogul who owned half of downtown. He was 42, devastatingly handsome, and according to every magazine, completely sterile. He'd been married twice before, and both times the marriages ended because of his inability to have children. The infertility had become a part of his public identity, something whispered about in high society circles. I was 27, struggling financially, and when I got the job at his mansion, I thought it was the answer to my prayers. The salary was 3 times what I'd ever made. The work was simple: clean his penthouse, cook his meals, manage his household. He was a generous employer, kind even. Too kind for someone of his stature. I remember the first time he looked at me differently. It was a Tuesday evening. I was reorganizing his library, and he came in with 2 glasses of wine. He said he wanted to thank me for my dedication. We talked for hours, about our dreams, our failures, our deepest fears. He confessed that his infertility had destroyed him emotionally, that he'd given up on ever having a family. I told him my story, how I'd come from nothing, how I wanted to matter to someone, how I wanted to leave a legacy. Maybe that's when he decided. Maybe that's when he first thought about it. But I didn't know that yet. I just saw a lonely man reaching out for connection, and I reached back. 6 months later, we were in love. Or at least, I thought we were. He told me he wanted to marry me, that he didn't care about the children we could never have together. He said my love was enough. I believed him. I was so naive. On our wedding day, dressed in white, standing in his family's private chapel, I felt like I was living in a dream. He looked into my eyes and promised me forever. He meant it too, but not in the way I thought. 2 months into our marriage, I got pregnant. We were both shocked. Alexander was pale, trembling. He said we needed to run tests immediately because something was impossible. We rushed to the hospital. The doctor confirmed what we both knew. I was carrying twins, a miracle for a man who was supposed to be sterile. Alexander held me close and cried. He cried so hard that his entire body shook. I thought they were tears of joy. I was wrong. The next morning, everything changed. Alexander was distant, cold. When I tried to touch him, he flinched. He started spending nights in his office. He hired a nurse to stay with me 24/7. When I asked why, he said it was for the baby's health. But I could see the fear in his eyes. I could see something darker than fear. It was guilt. 3 weeks later, I overheard a phone call. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I swear, I was walking past his study to get a glass of water when I heard his voice, panicked, frantic. He was on the phone with someone named Dr. Williams. "This is where everything fell apart," he said, and I'll never forget these exact words. The surrogate was unsupposed to actually get pregnant. "We have a problem." My blood turned to ice. "Surrogate." The room began to spin. I pressed my ear against the door, unable to breathe. He continued. "She doesn't know anything about the donor program. She doesn't know the babies aren't biologically mine. And if she finds out, ... double quotes. He paused, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "If she finds out, everything collapses. My reputation, my empire, everything I've built is gone." I don't remember how long I stood there, frozen in that hallway. Minutes, hours. My mind couldn't process what I was hearing. The babies I was carrying, the children I'd felt moving inside me, the children I'd already started to love with every fiber of my being, weren't my husband's, and apparently I was never supposed to know. I was never supposed to be more than a convenient vessel. I made my way back to our bedroom in a daze, moving like a ghost through the mansion I'd once thought was my home. Everything looked different now. The beautiful furnishings, the priceless art, the views of the city, they all felt like props in an elaborate deception. I lay in bed pretending to sleep when Alexander came in hours later. He didn't touch me. He just lay beside me in the darkness, and I could feel the tension radiating from his body like heat. I wanted to confront him so badly. I wanted to scream and cry and demand answers. But instead, I lay there, my hands on my belly, protecting the babies who were only half mine, wondering what my next move should be. The next morning, I called my best friend Emma and told her everything. I met her at a coffee shop far from the mansion. When I finished telling her what I'd overheard, she grabbed my hands across the table and said something that changed my perspective. "Sarah, forget about Alexander for a second. What about the babies? You're growing to human lives inside you. Those babies are still yours. That hasn't changed." She was right. The babies were mine. I was their mother. But the question that haunted me was, what had Alexander and this Dr. Williams planned? Did they think I'd simply sign away my parental rights after giving birth? Did they believe I'd disappear quietly once the babies were born, paid off and sent away? I decided I needed to know more. I needed evidence, insurance. That night, I went into Alexander's study while he was in the shower. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. I accessed his computer using a password I'd seen him type 100 times. My hands were shaking as I opened his email. There it was. Dozens of emails between Alexander and Dr. Nathaniel Williams, a fertility specialist. The emails detailed a comprehensive surrogacy arrangement. Alexander had paid $1 million for a woman to carry his biological child, but the woman had miscarried. Desperate, with his reputation at stake, Alexander had apparently seen me as the perfect solution. Poor, dependent on him, already emotionally invested. The emails discussed how he would convince me that the babies were ours, that he'd somehow miraculously overcome his infertility. After birth, they had planned to pay me a substantial sum in exchange for terminating parental rights. $250,000. That's what they thought my children were worth. That's what they thought I was worth. But here's where the story gets more complicated. As I scrolled through more emails, I found something unexpected. An email from 3 months ago, before I even got pregnant. Alexander had written to Dr. Williams saying he was having second thoughts. He said he'd fallen in love with me for real, that my presence in his life had changed him. He wrote, "I can't go through with deceiving her. I can't build our family on a lie." My breath caught. He was going to tell me the truth. He was going to come clean. But then there was a response from Dr. Williams. It was cruel and calculated. The doctor wrote, "You already committed fraud. The contracts are signed. The donor is paid. You're in too deep. Proceed with the plan or face legal consequences. Your reputation will be destroyed if this becomes public." Alexander's response came 3 days later. Just 2 words, "I understand." So he chose his reputation over my right to know the truth. He chose his empire over honesty. And the worst part, I could see that he hated himself for it. There was an email, dated just 2 weeks ago, that he'd never sent. It was addressed to me. He'd written about everything. About his infertility, about the donor, about his original intentions, about how he'd fallen in love with me and wanted desperately to tell me. He'd written about how he loved me more than anything in the world. He'd written, "I am a coward and a monster. I deserve to lose you and I will." But he never sent it. He saved it as a draft and walked away. I printed everything, every email, every contract, every piece of evidence. My hands were trembling as the printer hummed quietly in the darkness. I felt something shift inside me then, not just anger but clarity. I knew what I had to do. I heard the shower stop. I closed the computer and slipped out of the study just as Alexander emerged from the bathroom. He looked at me, and for a moment, I thought he might know, but I kept my expression neutral and walked past him to the guest bedroom, where I'd started sleeping days ago. Now I needed to be smart about this. I was pregnant with twins, completely dependent financially on a man who had betrayed me in the deepest possible way. I couldn't just leave and start over. I needed leverage. I needed to understand exactly what he'd done and what my legal options were. The next morning, I called a lawyer named Margaret Chen, someone I'd worked with years ago through a friend. We met at her office, and I showed her everything. As she read through the emails and contracts, her expression grew darker. When she finally looked up at me, she said, "Sarah, what your husband has done is extraordinary. He's entered into a surrogacy arrangement and withheld material information from you. He's planning to commit paternity fraud. These emails are evidence of conspiracy. You have a very strong case." I asked her what my options were. She explained that I could file for divorce immediately, sue for spousal support, child support, and potentially punitive damages. I could expose everything publicly and destroy his reputation entirely. But she also warned me, the media will be merciless. Your private life will be dissected. Your children's origins will be questioned. Are you prepared for that? I wasn't sure. I left her office with copies of her legal advice, my mind churning. As I drove through the city, I passed by Alexander's headquarters, a gleaming skyscraper with his name on top in letters 20 feet high. I thought about all the employees inside, all the people dependent on his company for their livelihoods. I thought about his parents, his siblings, the charitable foundations that bore his name. I thought about the power I held in that moment. I could destroy him, but would destroying him actually protect my babies? The answer came later that afternoon. I was back at the mansion, sitting in the nursery I'd been decorating for the past month. I was painting a mural of stars and moons when Alexander found me. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood in the doorway, watching me. I could feel his presence without turning around. "Hi," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't respond. I kept painting. "Sarah, double quotes," he began, then stopped. He started again. "I need to tell you something." My entire body went rigid. Did he know that I knew? Had he discovered that I'd accessed his emails? My mind raced through scenarios. "I've been having panic attacks," he continued, "every day for the past 3 weeks. Since you told me about the pregnancy." I turned to look at him then. He looked broken. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled. There were dark circles under his eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept properly in weeks. "I've been seeing a therapist," he said, "Dr. Morrison, and I've come to a realization. He took a shaky breath. I can't live like this anymore. I can't carry this weight. My heart stopped. This was it. He was going to confess. What weight? I asked carefully, testing him. His eyes filled with tears. I lied to you about something, he said. The biggest lie I've ever told. He sat down heavily on the floor of the nursery, right beside the pain supplies. These babies, he gestured toward my stomach. They're not biologically mine. My stomach dropped even though I already knew. Hearing him say it was different. It made it real in a way that reading his emails hadn't quite done. I used a fertility clinic. A donor. I couldn't tell you because ... He sobbed, his whole body shaking. Because I'm a coward. Because I was ashamed. Because I didn't know how. I stood there looking down at him, this powerful man reduced to tears on the floor of a nursery. I wanted to stay angry. I wanted to maintain my righteousness, but I was also confused. This was the confession I'd been waiting for. This was the moment I'd been dreading. And instead of feeling vindicated, I felt something else entirely. I felt sad for him. I felt sad for both of us. How long were you planning to keep this from me? I asked quietly. He looked up at me, shame written all over his face. I wasn't, he said. That's what I told my therapist. And that's when she told me that I had to tell you immediately, that there was no way to move forward as a family with this secret. I've been trying to find the courage. I wanted to believe him so badly. I wanted to believe that he'd been planning to confess all along, but I knew the truth. I knew that his therapist had probably given him an ultimatum, not just advice. I knew he would never have told me voluntarily if he wasn't forced into it. I have more to tell you, he said, and my heart sank further. There's someone you need to meet. I didn't understand what he meant until the next day. Alexander arranged for me to meet Dr. Williams at a neutral location, a lawyer's office where his attorney was also present. The doctor was older, maybe 60, with gray hair and an expression I couldn't quite read. When I entered the conference room, he stood to greet me. Mrs. Sterling, I'm Dr. Nathaniel Williams. I want to apologize for the deception you've been subjected to. Apology. That's not what I was expecting, he continued. Your husband made a terrible decision by not telling you the truth from the beginning. But I want you to understand the full context of what happened. He explained that he'd advised Alexander to tell me immediately, that their original plan had indeed been more nefarious than what Alexander had described, that the doctor had refused to participate once he realized Alexander had fallen in love with me. Your husband fired me as his physician 3 weeks ago, the doctor said, because I told him he had to either come clean or face the consequences. I even suggested that if he couldn't tell you himself, I would. I looked at the doctor, then at Alexander, who was sitting silently beside his lawyer. Why are you telling me this? I asked the doctor. Because, he said carefully, I believe you deserve full transparency. I believe your children deserve to be born into a family with truth as its foundation. It was a beautiful sentiment. It was also designed to protect him from any potential lawsuit. I wasn't naive to the implications of this meeting. The lawyer handed me a document. It was a confidentiality agreement offering me $5 million in exchange for my silence. Mr. Sterling believes this is an appropriate way to make amends for his deception, the lawyer explained. I looked at the number on the page. $5 million. That was more than enough to take care of my babies for their entire lives. That was enough to buy a house, start a business, secure their future. All I had to do was sign away my right to tell anyone what had happened. My hands were shaking as I read through the legal language. It was airtight. If I signed this, I could never speak about Alexander's deception. I could never go public about what he'd done. I would be financially secured, but silenced. I need time to think, I said. Alexander's attorney looked at me and said, You have 48 hours. As I left the office that day, I felt like I was being pulled in 1,000 different directions. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to reject the money, to go public with everything, to let the world know what Alexander Sterling really was. But I was also a pregnant woman with no independent income, carrying twins who would need me to make the right decisions. The weight of that responsibility was crushing. That night I didn't go home. I went to my mother's house. I hadn't spoken to her in 2 years. We'd had a falling out when I was younger, something about choices I'd made that she didn't approve of. But I was desperate. I sat at her kitchen table and told her everything. About Alexander, about the deception, about the money, about the babies. My mother, who was 58 and had lived a hard life, didn't interrupt me. She just listened. When I finished, she reached across the table and held my hand. What does your heart tell you to do? She asked. My heart, I said bitterly, doesn't seem like a reliable source of information right now. She smiled sadly. Your heart, she said, is exactly what you should listen to. Your head will give you 1,000 reasons to do the wrong thing, but your heart will guide you to what's right. She was right, as mothers often are. But what was the right thing to do? The 48 hours were ticking away, and I'd hidden myself at my mother's house, contemplating the biggest decision of my life. I had a bathtub full of Epsom salts that night, my swollen belly breaking the surface of the water like an island, and I pressed my palms against it, feeling the babies move inside me. They were already fighting for their space, already asserting themselves. These twins would be fighters. They would need a mother who fought for truth. not a mother who accepted settlements to stay silent. But they would also need food, shelter, education, and stability. By 3 in the morning, I'd made my decision. I called Alexander and asked him to meet me at a neutral location. Not at the mansion, not at a lawyer's office. He agreed, sounding nervous. I asked him to meet me at the pier at sunrise. When I saw him walking toward me in the early morning light, his silhouette against the orange sky, I was reminded of the man I thought I'd married. The man who'd seemed kind and lonely and genuine. But I was also aware that I was looking at a man who'd committed fraud, who'd manipulated me, who'd been willing to erase me from his children's lives in exchange for a legal fiction. "Hi," he said, and the word carried so much weight. I didn't say hi back. Instead, I handed him an envelope. "I'm not signing the confidentiality agreement," I told him. His face went pale. "I'm not going to tell the tabloids about the surrogacy," I continued. "But I'm also not going to pretend that this didn't happen." I opened the envelope so he could see the document inside. It was a modified custody and financial agreement that I drafted with Margaret Chen after leaving the lawyer's office the day before. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. "You're going to provide full financial support for me and the babies until they turn 18. You're going to establish a trust fund for each child worth $5 million that they can access when they turn 21. You're going to be present in their lives as their father, regardless of the biological reality. And most importantly, when they're old enough to understand, you're going to tell them the truth about how they came to exist. No more lies." Alexander stared at the document, then looked up at me. "This is better than what I offered," he said, confused. "Much better, actually." "I know," I said. "Because this isn't about punishing you. This is about protecting my children. This is about ensuring that they grow up knowing the truth so they can never be manipulated by secrets the way I was." He read through the document, his hands shaking. "Sarah, I don't know how to thank you," he began, but I held up my hand. "Don't thank me," I said. "You don't get to thank me. You lied to me systematically and comprehensively. You were willing to erase yourself from your own children's lives. You only confessed because you were forced to buy a therapist and because I discovered your emails." His face flushed with shame. "But," I continued, "I'm choosing to forgive you for my own sake, not for yours. Because carrying hatred will poison everything I'm trying to build. For the sake of my children, I'm going to work with you to create a different future. One built on truth instead of lies." Something shifted in him then. I could see it in his eyes. It wasn't gratitude exactly. It was recognition. Recognition of the person I was choosing to be, and the contrast with the person I could have chosen to be. Over the next 3 months, things were different. Alexander actually followed through on every promise. He attended therapy with me as a couple so we could repair the trust that had been broken. He met with Dr. Williams and asked him for recommendations for a different approach to our relationship. He even hired a family counselor to help us prepare for the moment when the babies would eventually need to know their origins. I went into labor on a Saturday morning in the 3rd week of May. Alexander was by my side through the entire 16 hours of labor. When the first baby, a beautiful girl, emerged into the world, I watched his face and saw something I'd never seen before: genuine, unconditional love that had nothing to do with biology. He cried when our son was born 30 minutes later, a robust baby boy with Alexander's eyes. I was holding both of them in my arms when Alexander looked at me and said, "I know I don't deserve your grace, but I'm going to spend every day of my life being worthy of it." I named the babies Sophia and James. Sophia after my mother and James after a teacher I had in high school who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. When we brought them home to the mansion, Alexander had transformed the nursery. The mural I'd started painting was completed, but he'd added something: 2 stars, slightly brighter than all the others, with the names Sophia and James written in gold beneath them. I saw that and I wept, not tears of pain but tears of something more complex, tears of a woman who'd been betrayed, who'd made a choice to forgive, and who was now standing in a space where healing might actually be possible. But this is where the real twist happens. This is where you think you know how the story ends, but you don't, because 2 weeks after bringing the babies home, I received a call from Dr. Williams. His voice was urgent, almost frantic. "Mrs. Sterling, I need to see you immediately. Alone. Don't tell your husband." I felt my stomach drop. What now? What other secret was about to be revealed? I agreed to meet him at his office later that afternoon. When I arrived, he looked shaken, like he hadn't slept. He closed the door and turned to me with an expression of someone carrying an impossible burden. "There's something I should have told you," he said. "Something I couldn't tell you before because of patient confidentiality, but I believe you have a right to know." I braced myself. "The donor," he said slowly. "The genetic father of your children." He paused, and I could see this was costing him something to say. "It's your own brother, Sarah. Your estranged brother, David." The world spun. I couldn't breathe. My brother David. The brother I hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade. The brother I'd had a terrible fight with and hadn't reconciled with. The brother I'd tried to forget even existed. Dr. Williams explained that David had been desperate for money several years ago. He'd responded to an advertisement for sperm donors through the clinic. He'd had no idea who the recipient was. He'd been paid $2,000 and signed away all parental rights. But here's the thing that made this even more complicated. David had recently found out. He'd run into someone at a bar who knew someone who worked at the clinic, and through a chain of gossip and coincidence, he'd discovered what he'd done. He was devastated. He'd wanted to know who had his biological children. He'd been trying to contact the clinic to find out. Dr. Williams had called David to give him a carefully edited version of the truth, that his genetic children had been born healthy and were being raised in a loving home. He hadn't told David who I was. He hadn't revealed my name, but he was now telling me because, in his professional opinion, this information would inevitably come out, and I deserved to hear it from someone I somewhat trusted rather than finding out through David's attempts to contact Alexander. I felt like I was falling, like the ground beneath me had disappeared entirely. Does Alexander know? I asked. No, Dr. Williams said. He was never told the donor's identity. That's standard practice in anonymous donor situations. Does David know that I'm the one? I asked. No, I'm an ethical physician, Mrs. Sterling. I wouldn't violate his privacy any more than I violated yours. I left his office in a daze. I drove to a park and sat on a bench, the spring air not touching me even though it was a beautiful day. My biological children were also genetically my brother's children. The implications were staggering. Were these children as much my brother's as they were mine? Did he have any claim to them? Would he want one? And the bigger question, should I tell him? When I got home that evening, Alexander took one look at me and knew something was wrong. What happened? He asked. I almost didn't tell him. I almost kept this secret to myself, the way he'd kept secrets from me. But I'd made a choice in this relationship to be different, to be better. So I sat him down and told him everything. I told him about David. I told him about the donor situation. I told him about Dr. Williams' warning that David might eventually find out who he is. Alexander listened silently the entire time. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something I didn't expect. We need to reach out to David, he said. We need to tell him the truth and invite him to be part of our children's lives if he wants to be. I looked at him incredulously. Why would you say that? I demanded. Because, he said quietly, I've learned that secrets destroy families, and because David didn't choose to give his genetic material to me. He did it because he was desperate for money. He's as much a victim of circumstances as you are. He deserves to know the truth about his biological children, so that's what we did. It took weeks to track down David's contact information. I was terrified when I finally called him. When he answered, my voice was shaking so badly I could barely speak. David, it's Sarah, I said. Your sister. There was a long silence. Then I know we haven't spoken in years, but I have something to tell you, something that's going to change your life. We agreed to meet in a neutral location, a restaurant, because neither of us felt safe meeting at the mansion or at his apartment. When David walked in and saw me sitting at the table, his expression was guarded. He'd always been handsome, charming, but there was a hardness to him now that I didn't remember from when we were younger. We ordered coffee, we didn't drink, and I told him everything. About the fertility clinic, about the twins, about the surrogacy, about his unwitting role in all of it. I watched his face go through a spectrum of emotions, shock, confusion, anger, and then something else, something that looked like grief. I have 2 biological children, he said finally, stating it like he was testing the words in his mouth. I do, I confirmed. Sophia and James, and they're being raised in a loving home. They have a father who loves them. They have a mother who loves them, and do I get to know them, he asked. The question hung in the air between us. I realized that despite everything Alexander and I had been through, despite all the deception and betrayal, this was actually the most important question. The question wasn't whether David had a legal right. The question was whether these children should grow up knowing the full truth about where they came from. I'd spent my entire life being hurt by secrets. I'd been deceived by the man I loved most. But I also knew that these children were mine. They would call me mother. They would look to me for guidance. And when they were old enough, they would want to know who they really were. Yes, I said, you get to know them. When they're old enough to understand who you are and what your role is in their existence, we'll tell them. And if they want a relationship with you, we'll facilitate that. But, I said firmly, you won't replace me. You won't replace Alexander. You'll be Uncle David. You'll be part of their story. And you'll understand that the man who raised them, who loves them, that's their father. You'll be a choice that they make when they're old enough to make it. David was crying by the time I finished, so was I. My brother, who I cut out of my life years ago over some petty disagreement I could barely remember now, was suddenly connected to me in the deepest possible way. We had children together, not in the way nature usually intended, but connected nonetheless. Over the next year, David became a regular part of our lives. He and Alexander actually developed a friendship. They went to therapy together to understand their complicated relationship and role in the children's lives. David attended Sophia and James's first birthday party. He brought them gifts. He learned how to change diapers and how to make them laugh. He was becoming, in every way that mattered, a family. But it wasn't without complications. There were moments when David would hold one of the babies and I'd see a possessiveness in his expression that made me nervous. There were times when Alexander would make decisions about the children without consulting David, and David would feel excluded. These were the growing pains of our unconventional family, but we worked through them, all of us, in therapy, in conversation, in the hard work of building something new. On the children's second birthday, all of us gathered at the mansion. My mother was there. Alexander's parents had even come, initially shocked and confused by the situation, but now simply happy to see their son happy. David brought his new girlfriend, Maria, who worked in social services and had a way of making everyone around her feel valued. Alexander gave a toast. He said, "2 years ago I thought I knew what my life would be. I thought I knew who I was. I was wrong about almost everything. But I've learned that the best moments in life often come from our worst mistakes, because they force us to become better people. Today, I'm raising 2 beautiful children with a woman who chose to forgive me, alongside a man who I never expected to call friend, and with the support of everyone in this room. I'm not the man I was 2 years ago, and I'm grateful every single day for that." I looked around the table at my family, at the family I'd never expected to have, at the family that was built not on lies but on truth and forgiveness and choice. And I realized something profound. The truth about where we come from doesn't define who we become. Biology is just the beginning of the story. Family is what we choose. If this story has moved you, if it's made you think about the power of forgiveness and the importance of truth, please hit that like button right now. And subscribe to this channel because we have so many more stories like this coming your way. Stories about families broken and rebuilt, about the power of honesty, about people who chose grace over revenge. Share this video with someone you love, because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is tell our stories and listen to the stories of others. Thank you for watching. I'm Sarah, and I'll see you in the next episode.